Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this research seminar on what the 2021 census figures really mean. Thank you for joining us wherever you are around Australia. My name is Stephen Reid and I am the research coordinator with the Christian Research Association. I'm also a senior researcher with the Australian Catholic Bishops Conference, National Centre for Pastoral Research. Before we start, I would firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where each of us are connecting in from throughout Australia, no doubt. I acknowledge the deep spiritual attachment and relationship that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to this country. And I personally commit myself to an ongoing journey of reconciliation. I'm joined by two friends and colleagues, Reverend Professor Philip Hughes and Dr Trudy Dantis, who, along with myself, will both be providing some insights about census data and how it can be utilised in church organisations to assist in pastoral ministry and in mission planning. Philip was the founding director and senior researcher with the Christian Research Association from 1985 until his retirement in 2016. He's currently a research fellow with Alpha Crucis University College and thankfully remains on the board of the CRA, as well as holding numerous other research and community-related positions. Now, Trudy has been the director of the National Centre for Pastoral Research since, I think it's 2018, although was a researcher and colleague with the centre from around 2010 to 2015. Leading the Building Stronger Parishes project. She holds honorary appointments at Australian Catholic University and the University of Divinity. And thankfully, again, Trudy's also on the board of the CRA, so we're well networked in this seminar. Now, for those of you who know little of the Christian Research Association, as mentioned, the organisation was founded in 1985 to serve the Christian churches of Australia by providing and promoting high quality research that enhances the mission of the churches and the well-being of individuals and society in Australia. Since its beginnings, the CRA has collaborated closely with many church, school and other Christian organisations, including the National Centre for Pastoral Research. About the National Centre for Pastoral Research, it's an agency of the Australian Catholic Bishops Conference established in 1996. It was called the Pastoral Projects Office back then. The vision of the office or the centre is to engage and support the Catholic Church's mission through pastoral research. It does this by planning and undertaking research, applying the research findings effectively into pastoral practice, and communicating the research findings within the life of the broader church. So that's a little bit about the two organisations sponsoring this seminar. Now let's talk about what we're here to talk about, the Australian census and what the census figures really mean. Now, so we're all on the same level playing field, my starting point is to presume that you know very little about the census. So firstly, let me tell you about the Australian census. We're very lucky in Australia to have such high quality data. It's data that includes every single Australian, but it offers a broad picture. So we don't want to research individuals within the community. It's about finding groups. It is about individuals. The data is about individuals and about households and about families. Now, most data is freely available via the Australian Bureau of Statistics website as well. I put a little asterisk there, a little caveat that you may need assistance in interpreting that data, and certainly assistance in locating the data that you may need for the purpose that you require it for as well. And that's where the CRA and the Centre for Pastoral Research can assist. The data is available for most geographical areas, right down to your local community level with 200-300 households. You can find that information right up to obviously the Australian level we're pretty fortunate in Australia that we have a census every 5 years. So the data is updated every 5 years. If you're in the UK or in the US, you'd have to wait 10 years for that data. But we're fortunate to have it every 5 years. Now, just a note about the release of data for the 2021 census. Some data is still not available. It's being released slowly over the course of the next few months, and we expect to have the bulk of the data we need for analysis hopefully by the end of October. But we have what we have at the moment, and hopefully that will offer you some significant insights into the data for your purposes. I also want to just talk about the religion question, because I think this is something that is perhaps ignored a little bit. This question, the religion question, what is the person's religion, has been asked in all Australian censuses. We're pretty, as I said, we're very fortunate that we have that question asked. It's the only optional question in the census. Even though it was optional, 93% of all Australians answered it. I think that's quite significant. The question is self-identification with a religious group or none. The question does not tell us anything about religious beliefs, the attitudes or practices of individuals. A note there as well, why do people tick a particular box on the census? We know there's various reasons. We don't know exactly why, but we can understand. Someone may tick a box, Christian or Catholic, Church of England, whatever it might be, because that individual is active in the church. They might attend church services once or more often every week. They might be involved in multiple parish councils or church boards, or they may not be. They may only attend church once, twice a year, if that. They might tick that box because it's part of their heritage. You know, they might say, well, my great-grandmother was Catholic, so of course I'm Catholic. It might be related to the school they went to an Anglican school, so they might closely identify with the values that school gave them. We can't find that out from the census data. We need other surveys to provide that insight to those sorts of information. About the no religion option on the question, it was introduced, I should say, in 1971. And it's different to not stated, very different to not stated. As I said, the question is optional. It does not necessarily mean, as some media outlets I'm sure will attest, it does not necessarily mean atheist or agnostic. In fact, in 2021, just 0.29% of Australia's population identified as atheist or agnostic or rationalist. No religion basically means I do not want to identify with a religious institution. And I think we need to remember that. Some of the growth that we see, that we have seen from the previous couple of censuses may reflect some of the trends in secularisation in Australia. However, other survey data tells us that there's many who describe themselves as having no religion, but consider themselves spiritual nonetheless. Some believe in God, some believe in a higher power, and some believe in neither. But the data, some other data suggests that about 1/4 of the population see themselves as spiritual, but not religious. And that proportion has been consistent over the past decade or longer. So that's a couple of notes about the census and the question. Some of the data, as I said, released at the end of June shows us how things are tracking. Australia's population grew to almost 25.5 million people. The Christian population was 11.1 million people. And quick calculations tell us that about just under 44% of Australia's population identified with one of the many Christian groups, denomination. About 1 in 10 Australians identified with one of the other religious groups. So it could have been Buddhism, Sikhism, Islam, Hinduism, and one of many others. There was certainly a growth there, 32% since 2016. And of course, the no religion continued to grow we're up to around almost 39% of Australians do not identify with a religious group. But keep in mind the slides that I've just shown you when we talk about that. Just some of the characteristics of Christians in Australia, according to the 2021 census. About 15% of Christians are aged under 15 years. That declined from 10 years earlier, from 17.7%. At the other end of the age spectrum, about 1/4 of all Christians are aged 65 and over, an increase from 10 years earlier, and that's significant. Those two, the first two lines there on your slide, tell us that the age profile of those who identify as Christian in Australia is ageing. About 72% of all Christians were born in Australia, and that's decreased from 10 years earlier. Just over sort of 27% were born overseas. At this stage, we don't know the breakup of non-English speaking countries and English speaking countries. We would suggest, though, that there'll be growth in the non-English speaking countries in that time. About 2.6% of those who identified as Christian have arrived in Australia in the last 5 years. Slightly lower than the overall Australian population, which was about 4%. What does it look like around Australia? Well, that map that you have on your screen there shows the proportions in each state and in each capital city of those who identify with a Christian denomination as a percentage of the population of the state or the city. The circles represent the states, the numbers in the circles, the squares represent those cities. And we see the highest proportions in New South Wales and in Queensland, as in the states, and the lowest in Tasmania and in the ACT. In the cities, the highest, not surprising, in Sydney and Brisbane, given that the states were also the highest, but the lowest in Canberra, and there's a fine line between what's Canberra and what is the ACT, but the lowest there in Canberra and also in Darwin. Looking at Christianity over time, in the last 120 years, there's been you could argue there's been a steady increase in the numbers of people identifying as Christian. And that graph on your screen shows in millions those number of Australians who identified in those census years. So from 1901, there was about 3.6 million people identified as Christian. And that increased right up until the 2011 census to about 13.2 million people, with a couple of dips in there. In around 1976, there was a slight decline, and then again in 2006. But in 2016, there was steady decline, and that continued in 2021 as well. But when you look at Christians as a percentage of the overall Australian population, that graph looks quite different. In 1901, 96% of all Australians identified with one of the Christian denominations, one of the Christian groups. That remained fairly consistent, up around 85% to 96%, up until around the 1970s, where it started to decline, and that decline has increased over the last couple of decades. And significantly, in the last 10 years, there's been significant decline as well. So what does that brief summary of the data tell us about religion in Australia? Which religious groups have grown and which have declined? This is where I'll hand over to Philip, and he is going to delve a little bit deeper into some of the insights.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for getting this started. And let me just share my screen. So overall, when we look at the different religious groups, we find that the greatest growth has actually been in Sikhism in the last 5 years. And in fact, the Sikhs grew most rapidly in the previous 5 years too. So over the last 10 years, they've been the fastest growing religious group in Australia, and now actually are twice as large as the Jewish population in Australia. Hindus have also grown very rapidly, and the Muslims have grown to some extent, Buddhists much less. Buddhists have grown at about the same rate as the overall population, around about 9%. Christians, as we've noted, have declined about 9% over the last 5 years. Why have some religions grown and others not grown? A major source of growth has been immigration. Indeed, over the last 5 years, the population grew by 2 million, and out of that 2 million, about 1 million were immigrants. So about half of all the growth in the population has to do with immigration. So a major source country of immigrants in the last 5 years has been India, and that has led to the growth in the Hindu and Sikh communities. Other source countries include Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran, and certainly they've contributed to growth in Islam. The other factor is the numbers of children being born within the various religious communities. And certainly a lot of immigrants arrive in their 20s. They have children within the next 10 years. And so immigrants also provide a lot of growth through the birth of their children. So the patterns of immigration have an enormous impact on the patterns of growth and decline in the various denominations and religious groups. So certainly the migrants by religion can be shown here. I said overall there was about 1 million migrants came between 2017 and 2021. However, a large number of those were in fact Christian. There was more Christian migrants than, in fact, most other groups. But in terms of Hindus, they were the second largest group, but significantly less than the numbers of Christians. So, in fact, the numbers of Christians are still having an impact on the growth of various denominations. All religions benefited from immigration between 2017 and 2021. Christianity benefited most, more than 290,000 extra people. 52% of all Christian immigrants, however, were Catholic, 151,000 of them. So that's had a significant impact on the continued numbers of Catholics. The next largest group were Anglican. About 20,000 Anglican migrants arrived, 16,000 Baptists, 11,000 who identify now as Pentecostals, And this compares with 176,000 Hindus and 48,000 Sikhs, just to give you a little comparison there. The other major factor in growth and decline is sort of the numbers of people having children and the numbers of children coming into being identified with the various churches. What we used to see 10, 20 years ago was that a large number of children, most children were identified with a particular Christian denomination by their parents when their parents filled out the census. And then we would find that as they left home and as they filled in the census form themselves when they were 25 to 34 years of age, then many of them would actually drop out of faith at that particular point in time, or drop out of identification at that particular point in time, and would describe themselves as having no religion. It's a little different now, and one of the differences is that a lot of families are not identifying their children with a particular religious denomination because the parents themselves don't have that identity. And so we're finding a lot fewer children than in the past identifying. On the other hand, if you look at the profile, we've still got far above the sort of average numbers of older people who identify as Christian. So the blue line is the population profile. The next to it, the orangey line is the Christians in 2021. And of all who identify now as Christian, 25% are 65 years and over. And that compares with the population then of 17%. Now that skew in the age profile has extended significantly since 2016. So the yellow bars are 2016, and we can see at that time 21% of those were 65 years and over. So there has been a significant change then. When we actually look at the actual numbers of people in the different age groups, we find that there's been, as I said, far fewer children being identified with a particular religious group. That's gone down 370,000 people from 2016, whereas people in the 15 to 24 age group, there's certainly been a decline there of 207,000. 25 to 34 declined there, declines right through to the age 45 to 54 age group, and then a much smaller decline 55 to 64, and then an increase in the number of Christians 65 and over. So considerable variation there by age group. So we've got fewer children being born into families who identify their children. Now there's been 6% growth in the numbers there. We've seen amongst Christians an 18% decline in the numbers being identified. But there's also a loss in these other age groups. So while the numbers in their older teenage years grew by 2%, there was a loss of 15% amongst Christians. But the greatest loss is that 25 to 34 age group as they move out of home, 18% loss compared with a 7.6% growth. Continuing loss amongst young families and also older families. Little loss in the 55 to 64 age group, some loss still, particularly given that the numbers in that age group have grown by 9%, while the numbers identifying with a Christian denomination have declined by 2.4%. And it's worth noting that although the numbers of older Christians has increased by 9%, there's been a 19% growth in the numbers in that age group, in the population as a whole. So certainly the numbers of older Christians is not keeping up with that growth in population. What that is indicating is that there's been a decline right through all age groups in terms of identifying with the Christian faith. It's not just sort of not just a cohort thing, but it's actually been a very broad cultural change that's occurred. Now, there's certainly considerable growth, difference between different denominations. So some have declined very substantially. The Anglicans, the Lutherans have gone down 16%, Presbyterian and Reformed down 21%, Salvation Army 28%, and the Uniting Church down 23%. There's been a few that there's been growth amongst the Baptists, but just of 1%, and of the Seventh-day Adventists, 1% growth. But remember that this compares with 9% growth in the population. So they have not been keeping up with the population. And while Eastern Orthodox have grown by 7%, it's still a little bit less than the population. The only group that's grown more than that is the Oriental Orthodox. Interesting to see that for the first time in the censuses, we've actually seen a decline in the numbers of Pentecostals. So that's a change. We can say a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Let's just look at the different denominations. Those that are declining rapidly include the Anglicans, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Salvation Army, and Uniting Church. All of those have a strongly Northern European origin. And when we look at the 2011 census, we find that there was comparatively few people who were born outside of the Western world at that time. And so these groups are not picking up proportionately a high number of immigrants. And that's one of the reasons for their decline. So this compares with 12% in the population who were born outside of the Western world in 2011. The other factor was that even in 2011, there was comparatively few in them who were of childbearing age. So amongst those who identified, that's identified in the census, of Anglicans, there was 36% who were 60 years of age and over, and in the Uniting Church it was 39% at that time. And when we look at attenders, as we get from general social surveys, the percentage of older people was considerably higher again. So there's few people who are actually involved back in 2011 who are having children. So that's been another factor that has a continuing impact on their decline. The other factor, however, is that many in these sharply declining denominations, most of them were originally state churches. They were the churches whereby people identified through their ethnic identity, through their national identity. And many of the people who were involved in them were nominal. They didn't necessarily attend very regularly. Perhaps at Christmas and Easter. And many of those people who were nominal have ceased to be nominal and now say that they have no religion. So that has been another factor in the decline. So few people are now being born into these churches and very few people are converted into them. The exception to this has been the Salvation Army, which has never been a state church. The denominations that are declining slowly or remaining fairly steady in numbers but declining in terms of percentage in the population include the Baptists, Catholics, Churches of Christ and the Pentecostals. Now, all of these groups are fed much more by immigration than those that are declining rapidly. So in 2011, of all the Baptists who identified, 18% were born overseas outside of the Western world. Amongst the Pentecostals, it was 21%, and Churches of Christ 11%, Catholics 10%. So again, these are groups which have been gaining through immigration, and certainly these groups have gained significantly, apart from the Churches of Christ, have gained significantly through immigration over the past 5 years. And again, these groups have a much younger profile, and so there's more in those groups who were of childbearing age and have had children over the past 5 years. Pentecostals have the youngest, by far the youngest of the profiles there. But another factor is that these churches have also required adult commitment, and they've expected high levels of involvement, and they've attracted many more converts. So while there's not many people who are converted according to the national censuses, certainly about 4% of the population say that they didn't attend church when they were children but have come in as adults. In Australia, certainly these churches that require adult commitment have maintained their numbers much more strongly than the state churches. The exception to that in this group is the Catholic Church, which has certainly been a state church in many countries, but has maintained its strength in Australia largely through enormous numbers of immigrants joining the church. Amongst the growing Christian denominations, the Eastern Orthodox, growth is a little less than the population. The Oriental Orthodox is the one that's been growing most rapidly, and that's including Coptics, grew by 19%, largely because of recent immigration and because of young families. Now, there's also been significant growth in those who have written into the census. It's not a box they can tick, but they've actually written in Christians. That they've described themselves as Christian. And that group grew by 12% between 2016 and 2021. So faster than any other Christian denomination apart from the Oriental Orthodox. There's now 688,000 people who describe themselves in that way. Now, some denominations have encouraged people to write Christian rather than identify with a particular denomination. And certainly that's true of some people in the Churches of Christ. It's been true of some Pentecostal churches. And so certainly the numbers in some of those groups that we find in the census does not accurately reflect exactly the number of people who identify with and attend those denominations. But identifying exactly who amongst those who describe themselves as Christian belong to those denominations, and who simply do not wish to identify with a denomination, who just simply want to say that they're Christian rather than being Hindu or Muslim or whatever. It's very hard to determine. We can't do that again from the census data. Just looking at the decline in the numbers of Christians around the different states of Australia, it's interesting to see that the decline has been greatest in rural areas rather than in urban areas. And the the fastest decline has actually been in the rural areas of Western Australia, with a 33% decline in 5 years. Also, high decline in Northern Territory and in Tasmania. And there's been least decline in some of the cities. Both Melbourne and Sydney have declined only by 10 and 11%, Canberra by 12%. Brisbane declined a little bit more by 14%. So again, the major factor making a difference there is the numbers of immigrants coming in. So while comparatively few immigrants move into the interior, into the outside of the major cities, most of them settle, at least in the beginning, in our major cities. So that's having an impact on those particular patterns. So what's been the driver, the major driver of change? Certainly we've seen a strong decline in Christians throughout the Western world and the Anglo world. It's said that the decline in the United States is actually one of the most rapid declines that's occurring in the world at the moment. The United States did keep up its numbers until recently, but it's certainly been declining very rapidly in recent years. One of the major sort of theories about the change that's occurred, secularization does not appear to be related strongly to belief, but it does appear to be related strongly to values. And certainly part of the change has occurred because there's been a change in values from a focus on family roles and duties to a sense of personal fulfillment. So life is defined far more today for most people in the Western world on personal fulfillment and comparatively little on family roles and duties. Now, the Christian faith has supported strongly the focus on family life, but it hasn't been seen to support in the same way this sense of personal fulfillment and the diversity of lifestyle and sexual orientation that's been implied by that. And that's the way that many people have interpreted that. And thus, that has been a major reason for people moving away from identification with religious faith and Christian faith in particular, and identifying themselves as having no religion. The values of family roles and duties, however, continue to predominate in many countries outside of the Western world. And there's particular reasons why that's happening. But because a lot of our immigrants come from these countries outside of the Western world, they bring their faith with them and continue to practice in Australia when they arrive. The statistics suggest that that's particularly strong in the first 10 years. There tends to be a weakening of their religious identity over the following years, and certainly in the second and third generations, much less identity. So the impact of immigration doesn't necessarily continue over many generations. But people from these countries continue to look to religion for support in these family-oriented values. So the decline has also been increased by a lack of confidence in religious institutions. At the moment, the most recent data suggests that just 11% of Australians have much confidence in the Christian denominations, partly because of the sexual abuse issues, but partly connected with this issue of values and personal fulfillment and the lack of tolerance a lot of people see for diversity. It's not fundamentally a result of individuals and pastors and priests not doing their job, but rather it's a matter of this general cultural change that's occurring. And so one cannot just turn the ship around by improving services or by having better pastoral care. I think myself that we need to look at how people are in fact seeking for meaning these days, and look at the ways in which they're forming meaning and nurturing their sense of spirituality. And perhaps by understanding that better, we can better serve the broader population. But let me hand over now for the final part of the seminar to Trudy Dantis. So thank you, Trudy.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Stephen, for that introduction earlier on, and good evening, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, and today I'd like to take you through and just explore with you the social profiles, which is how the Catholic Church uses census data. So we're going to look at that in greater detail. And I'll also share with you a few highlights, Catholic highlights from the census. So you've heard a lot about the Christian highlights that Stephen and Philip have explored. We're going to look a little bit at some of the Catholic highlights from the census. Now, before I get into that, Stephen introduced our office earlier on, the National Center for Pastoral Research, and we've been involved in a number of projects for very many years. This is just a snapshot, as you can see, of some of those different projects, and some of you might be able to identify some of them. But if you'd like to explore these projects in greater detail, many reports are available on our website, which is at the bottom, www.ncpr.catholic.org.au. So feel free to go in and have a look at a later stage. So let's look at some of the Catholic highlights. Well, this is a chart of Catholics over time in Australia, and Stephen showed you a chart earlier on, a very similar chart of Christians in Australia. We're now looking at just the Catholics. And you can see here the number of Australians identifying as Catholics. There's been a steady increase over very many years, right from 1911 right up to 2011, when Catholics made the number of Catholics in Australia were 5.4 million. However, since that time in the last decade, we've had a drop, and in 2021, 5.1 million Australians identify as Catholics. When we look at the percentage of Catholics, so the blue line is similar to the slide I showed earlier, but now we're looking at the red line, which shows you the percentage of Catholics in Australia. And as you can see here, we've had some highs and lows over the last few decades. We had a drop there to 19.6% in 1933, which was a long time ago. But then we've steadily increased. And in fact, in 1991, which is that figure over here, you can see that Catholics made up 27.3% of all Australians. Since that time, however, there's been a decline, and now in 2021, 1 in 5 Australians identify as Catholics. A few more highlights before I get into the social profiles. In terms of state populations, the highest Catholic population can be found in New South Wales, where 22.4% of people identify as Catholics, and the lowest is in Tasmania, where 12.7% identify as Catholics. We've had some changes over time since 2016. There's been a slight increase in the number of women. So in 2016, we had 52.5% females, and in 2021, that's increased to 52.9%, so very slight increase there. In terms of ethnicity, we've heard so much about immigrants and the effect of immigration on the Christians overall in Australia, but also on Catholics in particular. So there's been a slight decrease in the number of Catholics born in Australia. They were 72% as compared to 73.6 in 2016. Who are the Catholics who come from overseas? Well, we don't have information yet about countries of birth, so we don't have those details yet, but we know that our highest proportions of Catholics born overseas come from Southeast Asia, Southern and Eastern Europe, and Northwest Europe. So we're waiting to hear more about the countries in the coming months. The largest Catholic suburbs, well, something seems to be happening in Victoria there. Craigieburn and Reservoir, our first and second largest suburbs, are both in Victoria. So Craigieburn is the highest suburb with 17,048 Catholics, and Reservoir is just under 15,000 Catholics. Now, there are two remote Aboriginal localities which have the highest percentages of Catholics. And the first one is located in Western Australia, which is Kalumburu, where 83.8% of the population identify as Catholics. The second one is in the Northern Territories, Milikapiti, where 82.6% identify as Catholics. So, like I said before, these are just some highlights, and we hope to share more data with you in the coming months and certainly into next year as well. But let's go into the social profiles, which is what this presentation is all about. So the National Catholic Census Project is a project that started a long time ago, and over the last 25 years, we've continued to acquire data from the census. National data, but also data for every diocese and parish in Australia. So like Philip mentioned earlier, this is high quality data that's available even for the smallest areas. We create these national profiles, and I'll explain a little bit more about that, based on diocesan and parish boundaries. And let's learn a little bit more about that as well in this next slide. Now, before we get into that, who's counted in these profiles? Mainly Catholics living within the geographical boundary of a parish or diocese, or if it's a national profile we're looking at, of course, everyone in Australia who ticked the Catholic question or the Catholic option in the religion question in the census. So we provide data on Catholics and non-Catholics as well in these reports. We include families where one or more persons within the family has ticked the Catholic box. And we also provide data on Catholic households, and that's determined where at least one or more persons within the household is Catholic. So I spoke about diocesan boundaries. Now, all of Australia, for those of you who aren't familiar with Catholic diocese, Australia overall is divided into about 28 geographical dioceses, and this is what the map looks like. When it comes to parishes, boundaries look somewhat like this. So these are canonical boundaries, and you can see they're not very clear-cut. Sometimes they follow major roads and rivers, but at other times they might be just blocks of neighborhoods that are included in one parish or the other. Now, when we talk about census data, the smallest bit or block of census data is available as statistical area 1s, or SA1s as we call them. And so before we prepare these social profiles, a major job for our office is trying to fit a group of these statistical area 1s into those geographical boundaries that I just showed you. And as you can imagine, this is not a small task. It takes us quite a few months, and it's a lot of work contacting different dioceses and parishes to ensure that we've got the best possible fit of these SA1s into the boundaries. Now, we also know that parish boundaries don't stay the same. So over a period of 5 years, parishes might change and move. There might be new parishes that emerge in some dioceses. In other dioceses, 2 or 3 parishes might amalgamate into one mega parish. So an important part for us is to ensure that we have the list of accurate parishes the most current list, and then try and fit these SA1s the best way possible into those boundaries. Using this data then, using this group of SA1s, we can then go on to prepare our parish social profiles. Now, each profile is a 28-page report, and it contains 3 sections. So firstly, there are at-a-glance pages, as we call them. They're snapshots of data that give you, the most important variables that you might want to know about people living in your parish or your diocese. And then we go into overview pages. Overview pages look at the Catholic community in the parish, but then track the changes over time. So particularly, we show the changes between the last census and the current one for some of the major variables like population, birthplace, education, so on and so forth. And in the detailed profile, we do a lot of cross tabs between different variables, and we're able to provide details of a very detailed profile of people living within the parish boundaries over a number of variables. So let's look at some of these sections in greater detail. Firstly, the snapshot table. The snapshot table at the beginning, like I said, is a snapshot of the main variables or the most important data that you might want for your parish or your diocese. It contains variables like population, the median age of Catholics, the total number of Catholic families, but also details such as the number of Catholics who live alone or those who are born overseas, and so on and so forth. It's intended to give the person who's viewing the report a basic idea of who's who in the Catholic community. We then move on to time change trends, and this gives you a comparison with how the parish or the diocese looked in 1 year as compared to the previous census year. So most of the tables, as you can see here, are looking at data from 2016 and then comparing it to data from 2011. Obviously, we haven't received 2021 data in such greater detail as yet, which is why all the examples here are from the 2016 census. We then have the overview pages, and like I said, we do comparisons over time, but also other comparisons. For example, in a parish profile, you would have the data for the recent census, and here it's 2016, but it's also providing you comparisons with the parish in 2011, to the diocese in 2016, and to the national Australian picture as well. So that gives people in parishes or pastoral leaders or those in ministry an idea of how their parish is tracking along with national or diocesan trends. The last bit here just is a ranking of how the parish is ranked within the diocese or overall nationally as well. Now, within the detailed profile, each page of the Catholic social profiles, each table or graph provides many different details depending on the variable. So if you look at the religious affiliation page, it first gives you an idea of who are the number of Catholics within your parish, but also looks at other Christian denominations, as well as gives you comparisons to the non-Christians and those who identify as no religion. So within this parish, for example, anyone viewing this profile can see very, very easily that, yes, we've got a whole lot of Catholics here, but the largest group within the parish boundaries are those who identify with no religion. And then, of course, the detailed tables give you the changes in various age groups as well. So you can see the number of Catholics here at the top, but also comparisons with other Christian denominations as well. The parish profiles, the diocesan profiles and national profiles also contain a number of graphs and charts. And this is just an example of age and sex. As we can see here, a person looking at this profile will find this chart on the left-hand side very striking, because it shows you that within the diocese, there are not many young people who identify as Catholics. However, in the parish, both in 2016 and in 2011, you've got this amazingly high proportion of people who identify as Catholics. Now, that when you compare that with what Phillips told you and Stevens told you as well, you might think, oh, why is that happening? Of course, in this parish, it was because there was a university close by. So there's a lot of young Catholics coming in from outside the parish boundaries to stay within that area. But this, as you can see, both these charts and graphs give you a very good idea of who's who in the community, and it gives you a lot of ideas for pastoral ministry to ensure that what the parish is planning actually fits with the community profile as well. Another sample of detailed profiles, and this is the attendance at educational institutions, which shows you the number of Catholics attending the different types of schools in the area, but also gives you comparisons with those who are not Catholics and attend those schools as well, and the percentage of Catholics in each school. In terms of birthplace, we heard about immigration, how that's such a important part of the growing numbers for the Catholic Church. And so the profiles provide you with the birthplace of all Catholics within your boundaries, but also the top 5 birthplaces of Catholics born overseas. Now, in the past, it's been places like the United Kingdom, the Philippines, New Zealand, etc. But in recent years, we're seeing Catholics arrive from countries as varied as Brazil, Vietnam, China, Philippines, and Poland. So a lot of shifts there as well. We also provide a lot of textual commentary within the parish profiles to help parish leaders and those in ministry actually understand the information. There's also comparisons provided to the national profile, and also questions in there, like this is a section on the marital status of Catholics, and it provides a few questions for reflection to consider what pastoral care or pastoral programs are being offered in that area at the moment and how that might need to change. So overall, the social profiles, like I said, contain snapshots, timelines, tables, and charts. These are freely available on the website. Our office, you can see the number of customized items that we create. It's the last time we counted, it was about 55,771 customized tables in 1,297 reports. So no matter what you're interested in, you might look at the report and say, okay, I'm interested in young people. And then you might want to look at different parish reports to see the numbers of young people in those areas. You might want to compare them to the diocesan trends and to national trends as well. That's possible. But maybe within a community, parishes might be rethinking their strategies for people requiring care or elderly people. And having these profiles really gives you an idea of who's there within the community. Ultimately, it's not about the numbers, but it's about the people behind the numbers. And that's what we've got to keep in mind as well. So as you can see, you've got information in these reports on young people, indigenous, migrants, on education, students, those living alone, etc., etc. Now, in 2016, we prepared a report to help people understand their social profile and explore their social profile, because it can be quite intimidating for someone who's not familiar with numbers and charts. So this report is called Engaging with Your Parish Social Profile, and that's available on our website as well. The social profile data is also useful for communities because you can use it to combine it with other data sources. And this is a simple example here for Parish X. So firstly, we've got the total number of Catholics from census data, and we know that's 2,648. But then we compare it with attendance data that we've collected from another research project. And putting the two together, we can give an accurate attendance rate for that parish. So similarly, we could use this data for different parishes or different dioceses as well. And for those who like a little bit of advanced users of social research, this chart combines data from 3 research projects. Firstly, from the census to give us the population figures of different age groups. We then look at the numbers of mass attenders from another research project called the National Count of Attendance. And then we look at the age profile of these attenders from a 3rd research project called the National Church Life Survey to give us this complex chart of the number of Catholics in each age group within this area. We also offer extended social profiles. Some communities aren't satisfied with just a census profile report because they need more commentary to explain the numbers. And that's where we also provide this extended social profile that combines data from 2 or more research projects like I just showed you, but it also includes a lot of customized commentary for the parish team. So the full set of 2016 and 2011 reports are available on our website. You're free to go in and have a look and download any one you want. It's available, it's printable, so it's in the print format already, so that's easy to print as well. And if you want profiles from data further back, comparisons to 2006, that's available from our office as well. There's also a number of other census reports that are available, and you can view these on the website. And for those who require more training in understanding the parish profiles, we've also provided a video on the ACBC YouTube channel. So lastly, if you'd like to connect with us, here are our contact details. But thank you so much for your presence this afternoon, and over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much for that, Trudy, and thank you to Philip for those insights as well. We're about a minute or 2 over time, so you might be wondering how can the CRA assist, or the NCPR assist your church or your school or your organisation, your college, in understanding more about census data. And rather than show you further slides, perhaps the best is to, sorry, I've messed up the slides now, but probably the best way is to give one of us a call or send one of us an email, and we can talk through your needs, whether that's related to census data, whether it's related to other research projects that you're interested in. We have many years experience involved in all sorts of research projects, qualitative, quantitative, data analysis, literature review and analysis, and so forth. So what I might do is leave it at that for now. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. If you've enjoyed the seminar, then let us know. We can keep you in the loop about any future events that the CRA and the NCCPR might be involved with. For now though, thank you very much for connecting in with us, and do stay in touch. Stay safe and God bless. Thank you.